Jerusalem. Just saying its name awakens something special in the hearts of millions around the world. A city that has witnessed wars, conquests, devotion, and promises. A city that, despite the passing of centuries, remains the spiritual center for millions of believers who see it as a meeting point between heaven and earth. Walking through its streets means encountering the scent of ancient spices, voices in different languages, bells, chants, and calls to prayer. But among all that noise, there is one place that commands silence, a wall that seems to speak without uttering a word. That wall is known as the Western Wall, or the Kotel in Hebrew, a name that refers to the weeping of the people. For some, it is the beating heart of the Jewish nation. For others, it's simply a wall of stone. But for anyone who approaches it, it's impossible not to feel the weight of its presence, a place where emotions overflow and time seems to stand still. Imagine the scene. Thousands of people arrive every day before that ancient wall of stone. They come from every corner of the world. Some are Jewish men wearing kippahs, gently rocking their bodies as their lips whisper prayers in Hebrew. Others are curious tourists who watch in silence, respecting the solemnity of the moment. Some elderly men lean on their canes, taking slow steps, as if walking toward an old friend who has kept their secrets for generations. And among them, children, women, and men, all united by the same gesture, touching the stones. The touch is not accidental. Whoever presses their forehead against those rocks feels they are standing before a living fragment of history, and even more, before a space that connects directly with the divine. In the cracks of the wall lie thousands of folded pieces of paper filled with written prayers, petitions for healing, pleas for forgiveness, words of gratitude for blessings received, promises of faith. Some are written in Hebrew, others in Spanish, English, Russian, or Arabic. Different languages, but one same intention, that those words might reach God. Tears are also an inseparable part of this scene. It's called the Wailing Wall because for centuries, people have come here to mourn destruction, exile, and the absence of the temple. But they also cry for personal pain, for illness, for fear, and for hope, all that each heart carries within. In a way, this wall becomes a silent witness to all humanity. Every tear that falls joins an invisible river that runs between the stones, a river of faith that never dries. What's remarkable is that although this wall is today considered the holiest place in Judaism, it is not directly mentioned in the Bible. There is no passage that says, "The wall where the people will pray for generations." What is mentioned, however, are the great temples that once stood in Jerusalem. The Temple of Solomon, whose splendor is described in the books of Kings and Chronicles, and the Second Temple, built after the return from the Babylonian exile. Both were symbols of God's presence among his people. This leads us to a fascinating detail. The wall itself is not named in Scripture, yet it is deeply connected to it. Because when one approaches the Kotel, they are, in reality, remembering those temples, those promises, that relationship between God and his people that the Bible recounts time and time again. It's as if the stones themselves were a physical echo of what the sacred texts repeat over and over. Jerusalem, the chosen place. And here comes the inevitable question. If the Bible speaks of the temples but never mentions the wall, then what exactly is this place? To which temple did it belong? Is it a surviving fragment of Solomon's temple, destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC? Or is it part of the Second Temple, rebuilt centuries later? Who built it? And why did these stones, and not others, remain standing through the ages? That mystery continues to fascinate historians, archaeologists, and believers alike. Because the wall is, at the same time, a symbol of certainty, faith that was never broken, and a symbol of mystery, the enigma of its exact origin. People touch it as if they were touching the heart of the biblical temples, even though no one can point to a single verse that confirms it. The truth is, each stone seems to have its own personality. Some are massive and imposing. Others bear the marks of time, their surfaces worn smooth by the touch of countless hands over centuries. And together, they form a puzzle that humanity is still trying to solve. To understand the mystery behind the Western Wall, it's impossible not to pause at a figure who left an indelible mark on the history of Jerusalem, Herod the Great, a man surrounded by both light and shadow, remembered as much for his ambitious architectural projects as for his cruelty. He ruled Judea under Roman authority between 37 and 04 BC, and although he was a feared and often hated king, he left behind monumental works that still astonish the world today. Herod was not an ordinary king. He had an obsession to leave an eternal mark. He wanted to be remembered as someone capable of transforming cities, temples, and fortresses, and he achieved it through a construction program so vast that few rulers of his time could rival it. Among his great works were the port of Caesarea Maritima, the fortress of Masada, the Herodian Palace, and above all, the expansion of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. This last project was perhaps his most ambitious. The Second Temple, built after the return of the Jews from the Babylonian exile, lacked the majesty of Solomon's temple. For a people who still remembered the biblical descriptions of that first sanctuary covered in gold, the new temple seemed humble, almost poor. Herod knew this and saw in it an opportunity. Rebuilding and beautifying the temple would be the perfect way to win the favor of the Jewish people, who viewed him with suspicion because of his political alliances and Idumean origin. And so, around 20 BC, Herod began a colossal work. It wasn't merely a renovation of the existing temple, but an expansion on a scale never before seen. To accomplish this, he ordered the construction of enormous stone platforms that would support the sacred complex on the summit of Mount Moriah. And this is where the structure we know today as the Western Wall enters the story. The stones that make up the base of the wall are so massive that even today, engineers and archaeologists wonder how they were transported and set with such precision. Some weigh more than 500 tons. There is no mortar between them, and yet they fit together perfectly, as if they had been cut with modern laser tools. This technical detail remains one of the great mysteries of ancient engineering and a source of awe for anyone studying Herodian construction. Herod wanted to impress not only the Jews of his time, but also the Romans who ruled the world. His ambition was clear: to build a temple that could rival the grandest monuments of the empire. And in many ways, he succeeded. The completed complex not only doubled the size of the original temple, but also became one of the most impressive religious centers in the entire region. But what does all of this have to do with the Western Wall? According to most historians and archaeologists, what we venerate today is not a fragment of the temple itself, but part of the retaining walls of that massive esplanade built by Herod. In other words, the wall was not part of the inner sanctuary, but the monumental foundation that made it possible to expand the mount and create space for the temple and its courtyards. Here lies the great paradox. Herod sought to be loved by his people through this work, but history remembers him as a tyrant. He was a king who did not hesitate to eliminate members of his own family to preserve power. According to the Gospels, he was also responsible for ordering the massacre of the innocents in Bethlehem, an act that turned him into a symbol of cruelty. And yet, it was his architectural ambition that left standing the very stones that today form the spiritual center of Judaism. This contrast is fascinating. A man feared, almost hated, who with blood-stained hands built the most sacred monument for future generations. Historical irony? Destiny? Or perhaps a mysterious way in which the divine uses the human, even the imperfect, to fulfill its purpose. Beyond religion, the technical magnitude of Herod's construction still amazes. The exact methods used to move such enormous stones remain a matter of debate. Some studies suggest the use of wooden rollers and lever systems. Others believe the stones were carved on site and moved only a few meters. What is certain is that the result was a structure so solid that more than 2,000 years later, it still stands. And here enters another debate that keeps the intrigue alive. Do all the stones we see today truly date back to Herod's time? Some archaeologists point out that the lower courses, made of massive blocks perfectly fitted together, are unmistakably Herodian. But the upper layers, added in different eras, bear the marks of later periods: Byzantine, Arab, Ottoman. This makes the wall a kind of historical palimpsest, a structure modified and rebuilt time and time again over the centuries. Yet despite these later additions, the heart of the wall, its oldest, most monumental stones, almost certainly point back to Herod. That's why, when someone asks who built the Western Wall, the most widely accepted historical answer is clear. It was constructed as part of Herod's grand project to expand the Second Temple. But of course, not everyone agrees. Some propose alternative theories, that parts of the wall may date back even earlier, perhaps to the time of the kings of Israel. Others argue that its value doesn't lie in who built it, but in the simple fact that it survived. Still, in the prevailing historical narrative, Herod's name echoes the loudest dot, and the inevitable question remains: how can it be that a man like Herod, driven by ambition and fear of losing power, ended up building what, for millions, became the greatest symbol of faith? Perhaps because, in his attempt to immortalize himself, he ended up immortalizing something far greater than him, a wall that survived time, the temple's destruction, and the fall of empires. Herod wanted to be remembered, and he was, but not in the way he imagined. Not for his palaces or his wealth, but for a wall before which millions still pray and weep centuries later. That is the paradox of history. What the powerful build out of ambition sometimes becomes the spiritual refuge of the humble. The splendor of the temple rebuilt by Herod did not last forever. Just a few decades after its expansion, the Second Temple met its darkest fate. The year was 70 AD, and the Roman Empire had decided to crush once and for all the Jewish rebellion that had begun 4 years earlier. Jerusalem became the epicenter of a brutal war, and with it, the temple became the primary target of Roman fury. Historical chronicles describe the scene with chilling intensity. Entire legions surrounded the city, cutting off supplies and trapping the people between hunger and despair. The historian Flavius Josephus, an eyewitness to those events, wrote that Jerusalem was burning from within, even before the Romans breached its walls. Internal strife, rival factions, and families torn apart by starvation. The holy city had become hell on earth. Finally, the legions under General Titus broke through the defenses. What followed was devastation. The Romans stormed through the streets, set homes ablaze, and slaughtered thousands of men, women, and children. Blood flowed over the ancient stones like a river. And amid that chaos, the holiest site in Judaism, the temple itself, became the very center of tragedy. The fire consumed its structures. The gold that adorned the sanctuary melted. The cedar wood burned with fury. What had been built to glorify God, what for centuries had embodied the faith of a people, was reduced to ashes and rubble. Smoke rose into the sky like a visible lament, a sign that something far greater than a building had been destroyed. The hope of the Jewish people, ever seeing their temple stand again, decades earlier, Jesus had spoken words that now echoed as a fulfilled prophecy. Do you see all these things? Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. Matthew 24:2. For many believers, the destruction of the temple was the literal confirmation of those words. None of its main structures remained intact, and yet one fragment endured. Not the inner sanctuary, not the altar, not the Holy of Holies. What survived was part of the retaining walls of the Temple Mount, what we now know as the Western Wall. The contrast between the magnitude of the tragedy and the endurance of that wall is what gives this place its deep symbolic power. Thousands were exiled after the destruction, scattered across the Roman Empire, forced to live in distant lands. Jerusalem lay in ruins, its walls shattered, its streets turned into an open graveyard. The temple, once the pride of a nation, became only a memory. And yet, in the midst of desolation, the wall remained. For the survivors, and for generations that followed, that wall became far more than stone. It was the silent witness of what once was. Every Jew who looked upon it saw not just limestone blocks, but the memory of a temple lost. The wall became a symbol of mourning, of exile, and of longing. It's no coincidence that it came to be called the Wailing Wall. For there people wept not only for the loss of the temple, but for the loss of an entire national and spiritual identity. The destruction of 70 AD was not just a military catastrophe. It was a wound that forever changed the course of Jewish history. From that moment began what is known as the diaspora, the dispersion of the Jewish people throughout the world. Without a temple, without a physical center for sacrifice and worship, Jewish faith transformed. It became more intimate, centered on prayer and the study of the Torah. And in this new form of spirituality, the surviving wall played a crucial role as the point toward which prayers were directed, the physical reminder that kept Jerusalem alive in the hearts of the people. Curiously, the wall was not always regarded with the same sacred reverence it holds today. For centuries, it was merely a fragment of the past, visited with nostalgia. Over time, as pilgrimages continued generation after generation, its significance grew until it became the spiritual heart of an entire people. The tears shed before its stones gave it meaning, transforming it into the holiest place in Judaism. And here arises a question. Why? Among all the grandeur of the temple, did only that part endure the wrath of Rome? Or was it, as many believe, the invisible hand of God preserving a place where his people could continue to pray through the centuries? Some historians argue that the explanation is purely practical. The wall was part of such a strong foundation that the Romans saw no need to destroy it, having already accomplished their mission of leveling the temple itself. Others, however, see in its survival a spiritual sign that even in the midst of destruction, God left a tangible reminder so his people would never forget his promise. Imagine, for a moment, the survivors of the year 70, staring at the smoke rising from the temple ruins. Everything seemed lost. And yet, amid ashes and devastation, those massive stones stood firm, unshaken. For some, they were a reminder that although the temple had fallen, faith itself must not fall with it. For others, they were a painful memory of what had been lost. But the wall was not always easily accessible. Throughout history, different empires ruled Jerusalem: Byzantines, Arabs, Crusaders, Ottomans. There were times when Jews were allowed to approach freely, and others when they were restricted or even forbidden to pray there. These prohibitions only deepened their yearning. The wall became a symbol of resistance, identity, and hope amid exile. Today, the Western Wall no longer belongs only to Jewish memory. It has become a meeting point for the entire world. Thousands of visitors of all faiths come every day: Catholics, Muslims, evangelical Christians, Greek Orthodox believers, all recognizing it as a place of connection with the divine, each through their own faith. The silence that dwells there transcends differences. Before those stones, even non-believers feel the weight of history. The wall has also witnessed historic moments that highlight its universal significance. Presidents, popes, religious leaders, and heads of state from many nations have placed their prayers within its cracks. Images such as Pope John Paul II in the year 2000, bowing his head before the wall and leaving a handwritten note, traveled the world, delivering a powerful message. This is not just a site for one people. It is a space where all humanity can approach the sacred. The same has happened with American presidents, European leaders, and representatives of many cultures. In a way, the wall has become a universal language, the language of faith and hope. Today, it doesn't matter whether someone comes from New York, Buenos Aires, Paris, or Jerusalem itself. Everyone who stands before the wall feels the same: an indescribable force born from silence, from the weight of centuries, and from unwavering faith. Some call it spiritual energy. Others, the simple emotion of standing before a living witness of history. But one thing is certain: no one remains indifferent. And here is where the wall ceases to be merely an object of the past and becomes a mirror for us all. Because those stones, which have withstood wars, destruction, fire, exile, and oppression, still stand. They were not torn down by the Romans. They did not crumble with time, nor fade with the centuries. They are still there, firm, enduring, a reminder that faith can survive even the fiercest storms. Isn't that what we often need in our own lives? Just as that wall withstood the passage of time, we too face trials that seem insurmountable: family struggles, loss, moments of pain, failures that leave us in ruins. But the wall teaches us a powerful lesson. Even when everything around us collapses, something firm can remain to hold us: our faith, our hope, or the quiet certainty that tomorrow can be different. The Jewish people, scattered throughout the world, never forgot Jerusalem. In their daily prayers, they repeated the words, "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill." And when they wept before the wall, they remembered not only the destruction of the temple, but also the promise of restoration. The year 70 marked a turning point, a moment when Jesus' prophecy was fulfilled and the long wait for redemption began. And through it all, the surviving wall became a bridge between what was and what was yet to come. So, was it mere coincidence that this wall remained standing? Or divine providence? That is a question each of us must answer. For believers, there is no doubt it was God who preserved those stones as a sign that his covenant with his people would never be broken. And perhaps that is why, centuries later, we still speak of it as a place where heaven and earth meet, even among the ruins. And maybe, like those stones, your life too can stand firm upon what never crumbles: faith and hope. May God's blessing be with you.